So welcome to PenguinPod. This is another episode in our series looking at autism. We've been meeting with various parents and discussing their journey in discovering that their child might be autistic, and then the assessment process and how they dealt with the school and things like that. But today we're going to be talking to Simon, and Simon is an autistic adult who received a diagnosis within the last few years. So I thought it would be interesting to hear from somebody who grew up not knowing that they were autistic, and just to kind of discuss how he came to that as an adult, the difference it's made in his life. Let's start with what happened as an adult that made you pursue an autism diagnosis. Did you have an aha moment, or was it like a slow burn? What happened? And how old were you?
Well, I would have been, but the process started when I was about 40. It wasn't something that I could have generated as such. What happened was I had a breakdown in 2018. I was unwell,
Right.
mental health. I've had mental health diagnosis since 2000, so that's been something that I've had anyway. And I got unwell in 2018, and I was seeing the kind of psychiatric people at the time. They're nice people, just in Newcastle where I'm based. I think generally I was seeing a younger gentleman, and I like the guy, he was a kind of guy. But at one session, he had an older, perhaps more experienced senior lady in with him. And anyway, they were obviously watching me kind of converse with him and stuff like that. And I think she practically kind of nudged him and said, is this guy potentially on the spectrum, you know? So that kind of probably set the whole thing off. I think it might have been her experience in that respect that kind of started the ball rolling. And they sent me forward to get diagnosed. And now, obviously, as we're all aware, that takes a long time. It took me over 18 months to get the diagnosis. But to be honest, it was during the pandemic. Well, it wasn't fully during the pandemic. The latter part was during the pandemic. I didn't find the wait too terrible, but I can appreciate how people might find it quite tough to bear. At the time, it seemed to pass okay. And what happened was in 2020, in September, I went through, sorry, I'm probably answering lots of questions at once
No,
here.
you're fine. Crack on, it's good.
The process of getting diagnosed, obviously they get asked lots of questions and stuff like that. They asked my mother as well, you know, how I was as a child. And I just said to my mum, just say what you've got to say, you know, and there's no kind of right or wrong, just be totally frank with them. You know, I don't mind either way. And so she said what she had to say. And in September 2020, I got this diagnosis. In the meantime, I'd been doing a bit of moderate research into the thing, and I thought, you
Of
know
course.
what, I think I've got it. You know, I think I've got it. I wasn't blown away or upset, or you know, it was just always matter of fact. I thought I've probably got autism, you know. And my dad was like, "Oh no, you know, I think he's a bit more perturbed by this whole thing. I don't think you like the idea of it really." And he said, "Oh, I don't think you have, you know." But I thought, no, I probably have. So when I got the diagnosis, I wasn't really shocked.
So when they first mentioned this to you back in 2018, were
Yeah.
you surprised? Do you feel like you didn't know that much about it? Or did you think, oh yeah, I mean, before you started your research, had it ever been something that had crossed your mind?
Not really, to be honest. And it's this funny thing. It's funny when you say, when I would say I wasn't massively surprised, but yet I hadn't thought about it as a possibility.
Mm,
Um, it wasn't a major surprise as such, you know. Like, but it hadn't really. By the same token, it hadn't really crossed my mind until that point, you know. It was a bit like
right.
so it's new because I had this mental health diagnosis, so I thought, what other thing have I got to kind of contend with? But I wasn't. It wasn't a massive surprise, but neither was I expecting it, if that makes sense.
Okay. And what language do you use to describe yourself? Because I know that the language has changed and is constantly evolving, and
Yes,
certain
yes,
things are like become unacceptable to say quite quickly.
yes,
So
yes,
like, as an autistic man, how do you describe
yes.
yourself?
Well, I guess I'd say I'm autistic. I guess
Right.
that would be fine for me. I don't mind that. They were very sensitive. What I will say is they were very sensitive when I did get diagnosed. The lady who gave me my diagnosis, we had a chat on Zoom and what have you. She said to
Mm,
me, "I'm not diagnosing you with Asperger's because that's you know, it's a term used to describe high function autism." And she said she told me that she feels that expression, that term, diminishes the severity of autism. So by saying you know your high function in inverted commas, it's not helpful. So you know, basically, that was very helpful for me. She's just very sensitive. They're very sensitive to the whole thing. So I don't know very much, but that's the only thing I know about Asperger's. It seems to be not a word that seems to be used perhaps as
mm,
much. But like I say, it's early days for me in my diagnosis. I got diagnosed 3.5 years ago. I was just doing some reading at the weekend it's to be perfectly frank, it's something I've got to read up on more. Is my own condition. Some people are very much on board with it and fascinated by the subject, and they want to find out more about it. I'm a bit of a late developer. What happens with me, for example, is we have our specialist subjects and stuff like this, things we
Sure.
specialize in, and our obsessions, you might almost put it. Well, for mine, as you know, Lorraine, it's music. I'm crazy into
Yep.
music, and I spend so much time doing my music. It practically has written out me kind of until the weekend, where I thought I really need to do some reading on this subject. Not just because I'm chatting to yourself, but just generally. I thought, and my music's, I'm kind of on top of my music. I work so hard on my music. I'm kind of on top of it at the moment. I don't really I need to do much more for a couple of months on it, in some regards anyway. So I thought I'll do a bit more
Mm.
reading. So I'm in the process of reading up on it. But I've been learning stuff even at the weekend, which has been quite interesting for myself just by reading up on it. So yeah, so constant education, I
Can you
guess.
can you think of any revelations you've just had this weekend?
Yes, I can most definitely. There's one I had at the weekend, for example. I had a mental health condition that developed in 2000 when I was about 22. And
Mm.
I think basically, speaking very frankly about the subject, when I was younger, I had a bit of cannabis and stuff like that. Not a great deal, but the chances are that this probably caused my mental health problem. And like it's quite possible anyway. I don't know that for a fact. I've never
Wow.
worked, but it's quite possible that the little I had might have done. Now I've always kind of accepted that on some level. I don't even know that to be true. It's just a theory, Nick. But what I didn't realize until the weekend is, and this might be interesting, is having autism. You're much more vulnerable to that, having cannabis and stuff like that, to maybe causing that fracture. So
Oh,
I hadn't realized there's a connection perhaps there, because I wasn't a heavy smoker when I was younger. I didn't have a great deal, but I probably had bottles and stuff like that, which is not good, like not at any great degree. But what I had was probably bad for me. And like I say, it's just total speculation that this was caused it for me. It could have been a whole number of factors. I might have ended up with it anyway. I mean, I wasn't very happy adolescent, to be perfectly honest. So it could be awry with that theory. But what was interesting was that autism and that kind of way of going down to mental health problem seems to be a certain link there. So I found that interesting. It kind of it opened up to me. So it's perhaps just bad luck in terms of me getting my mental health condition. But that I found that tougher to contend with than the autism, to be perfectly
sure.
honest. The autism diagnosis was practically in inverted commas good news compared to getting the mental health, because it's allowed me to get help. I have support package now. I've got personal independence payment, stuff like that, things. Whereas when I just in inverted commas had a fairly serious mental health condition as it's diagnosed,
Yeah.
I didn't get quite as much support. So it hasn't
Isn't
been
that
bad.
isn't that just so
I know.
strange though that
I know. Well, yeah, as you say, crazy. Yeah,
well,
but it
yeah,
is.
exactly. I was going to
I
say
know.
that, and
Yeah,
then I thought
but
better
it
of
is,
it.
because the condition I've got it's quite a serious one, and you know, but I've found, so the autism one has been practically. That's not a nice way to say good news, but it hasn't. It's a bit of a strange way to term it, perhaps not in the right way, but. I haven't found it to be the terrible diagnosis compared to the previous one, which was a horrible diagnosis. Yeah.
I think, to be honest, Simon, I think part of what I've probably read more about it than you, and I'm not autistic, but my son is
Yes.
autistic. Um, but one of the things I'm quite keen to explore is it not good news? I mean, having a different neurotype to me is actually, it's kind of the cool crew, like I
Yes.
actually think
Yes.
most of the people that I know and consider friends are neurodivergent, and I think if I analyze that, I would see that that's just because we gravitate towards each other, because
Yes.
we struggle to understand the operating system of the neurotypical world, whatever that means. There's so much more that we get to find out about autism. But I think
Yeah.
that, first of all, going back to what you how you describe yourself and how it was termed to you, I think that's come along in a huge journey as
Yes.
well, because I know that there's a controversial issue around the person that was Asperger, because he
Yes.
was some connection to the Nazis, and
Oh,
he was
right. Yes.
using, apparently he was this is my layman's understanding, is he used the concept of Asperger syndrome to say, well, these people are autistic, but they can be useful to us, as opposed to these
Oh,
people who can't. It's pretty shocking. If I wouldn't dig too much into it, it's pretty
yes,
dark. So
yes,
people have jettisoned that phrase. Then we replaced it with high functioning autistic. And as you
yes,
say, it's not only disrespectful to people who perhaps aren't whatever high
yes,
functioning means, but what never ceases to amaze me with both autism and ADHD is how I don't know many other things where you're judged based on your behavior or how other people experience you rather than how you experience yourself. I find it absolutely fascinating because
yes,
what the outward world might consider high functioning probably masks a whole bunch of internal struggles that you've dealt with throughout your life that may or may not have manifested in other mental health problems. I'm not saying one caused the other, but they can't be exclusive from each other, right? And I
yes,
think if you grow up believing that you're just weird and wrong and broken rather than, no, I have a different neurotype and these are the things I need putting in place to help me cope with life better, and it's the world that's disabling me rather than me being disabled, then perhaps you wouldn't have had such a I don't know, Simon.
yes,
It's
yes,
conjecture, we'll never know, but I just think I think it is good news. I think being autistic, I don't think
yes,
there's anything that's not to detract from people who are disabled by their autism. They might have mutism, they might really have such acute sensory issues that they can't think straight. I recognize it can be disabling, but I also think it can be, I think it's more good news than bad if you have
yes,
a support system around you that
yes,
helps you curate a life that works for your neurotype rather than trying to fit
yes.
in. Sorry, that's my rant.
No, no,
Um,
I totally get where you're coming from. Absolutely, that's right. I was just so lucky. The sensitivity that people showed to me when I got my diagnosis. It didn't have to be that way. I could have had people saying, here's another one, like, but they were just so sensitive, like, which I appreciated. I mean, I'll give you a case in point of how the autism's a strange one. I did a gig at the weekend. There weren't a vast amount of people there, but we went canny enough. I performed okay. And afterwards, I thought my parents must have been thinking to themselves, this guy really got autism, he's been able to do a gig, walk up there, play in front of these people, like kind of come up with some spiel, on stage in between songs. And I just suppose it shows to me, there's just the whole notion of masking, I have to mask when I do a gig.
of course you do.
Really, yes, I have to. Like in that case, I don't have to, but you do. You just in that kind of very not almost formal social setting, if you want to call it that, where there's a certain script you've got to say. Oh, thank you to the sound guy, thank you to the venue, thank you to the other act, all that kind of stuff. There is a kind of like way of going about it to get you more kind of like recognition in a way. Like, and
Mm,
I've done it enough times now to pull it off, but. It was masking, there's no other way to describe what I was doing then, like,
yeah.
you convince yourself, you convince yourself until you kind of, you realize the next day, pooh, that was tiring, like,
Yeah.
you,
Well, and
you
this is the
convince
thing.
yourself.
It would be more tiring for you to follow that social code that you've had to learn, that's been
Yes,
harder for you to learn because of your neurotype than perhaps
yes,
someone who's neurotypical. Therefore, it's going to have a knock-on effect on your next day. And this is the thing,
yes,
isn't it? Learning to lean into your neurotype. Like I use that phrase rather than, because I hate the phrase autism spectrum disorder. It's like,
yes, that's interesting.
my son doesn't experience himself as disordered,
Yes,
and I have a disorder. I have ADHD disorder, and I don't
yes,
consider. That's not to say that I don't struggle with things, because I do, but I don't consider being an empath and having really focused interests and being super creative as being. I think if you don't have that, you're disordered. Like there's something
yes.
weird about people who don't like. So anyway,
No, I
um,
understand.
yeah, exactly. I think it is something that and I think by default, would you say that you have ended up curating your life around your autism? Because, for example,
Yes.
what jobs did you have and how did they go? Kind of normal people jobs.
Oh, well, yes, you 100% hit the nail on the head then, because that is what's happened. I left my job. Well, I've been working on and off at a music venue for quite a few years, but I left it. I was out of that particular job for 5 or 6 years, and
Hmm.
I went and registered self-employed with my music. Well, I work hard on my music, but I don't make much money from it because I just record
No.
and and I don't do many gigs. There's not much. You get very little money from recording nowadays. So I do self-employment. I got some funding last year to create some music, which is great. So I've pretty much done that now. It's made, and I'm going to be releasing it later in the year. But in terms of the life I've kind of created for myself, it is pretty much almost what happens with a lot of people with autism. I've become self-employed. What I tend to do with my time, I keep my days busy. Like I've been so busy with my music. In answering your question, I left my job in March at the music venue, not because of the people. The people are lovely, no complaints there. What happened was I went on holiday with my parents in February. And I thought, you know what, I'm just worrying about my shifts. And that's just the word I'd use, worrying. And I thought, I'm worrying about it. It's always on my mind. I was only doing 1 or 2 shifts a week. I wasn't doing very many, but it was just this constant background worry of like, because I didn't think I'd be very good in an evacuation. I thought I'd panic because I work in the music venue on the halls and stuff like that. It was just worry. And I thought, you know what, I could get by without this job. I would be less well off, but I could get by without it. So what happened, I left in March. I was only there 6 months or so. And what I've done since then is I've been very busy with my music work in a good sort of way, keep myself occupied with that. And what I've done is I've taken lessons in Spanish because I have an aspiration to spend more time in Spain in later life, which may or may not be realistic, but I'm learning Spanish and it's going really canny. And also we're talking about kind of the, autism skills at the risk of sounding boastful.
Languages.
I'm okay. I'm okay at the old
Yeah,
Spanish.
languages.
Very early
Absolutely.
days. The reason why I say that is because I think there's this thing they called auditory discrimination, and I perhaps can hear where you've got to accent it different. They go, and perhaps as well. What I will say is I'm probably less afraid of making an idiot of myself in the class by giving it the accent. I think a lot of people in the class might think, oh, I'm sounding a bit pretentious by saying ham on and all this kind of stuff. And I think autistic people are perhaps more prepared to kind of go out on a limb and go, I'm prepared to just own this, I think I'm happy to stick the accent on and make myself look like the SWAT. I learned what the word for SWAT is in Spanish every day, or nerd anyway. So empanoyo.
What is it?
Empanoyo. I think that's right. Empanoyo.
Empanoyo. I'll teach that to my son's learning Spanish as well. He's on.
Oh, brilliant! Yes.
So he's on. He's learning it on Duolingo on an app.
Oh, yes.
Brilliant,
yes.
And he's on a 120-day streak or something. So he's quite
Brilliant.
obsessive about it, and he's talking in Spanish with us,
Brilliant.
and he's starting to think in Spanish. Right, like he's got a long way to go. He's only 9, but he's got this real. But he wants to learn Welsh.
Wow, Welsh.
Because he sees it as fascinating and interesting. So I can see that that particular flair. I'm not saying that's particularly an autistic thing, but what you're saying about your worry or perhaps anxiety about your job, I just want to dig into that for a second.
Yeah.
So were you saying that your anxiety was specifically about the potential of there being an incident?
That was one of the worries I had. I lost confidence in how I was out of that job for 5.5 years out of my own volition. Where I had a breakdown, I had to leave. There's no two ways about it. I was in a terrible way. I wasn't capable of working there for a period of time. But yeah, I guess that was one of the worries. Was if there was an evacuation, people in wheelchairs would have to go out via a certain exit, which I'd have to be responsible for. The whole thing, I just sounded like a nightmare. Like for me, like I didn't know how well I'd cope in that situation. Also, I'll tell you something. This didn't even happen actually at work very often in my situation, but stuff I really struggle with. Just to give an example of how work can be tough, is what I'm not good at. For example, somebody coming up to me and saying, "Right, can you do this, that, do that, and the other?" I don't know what's going on there. That's just a whole series of words. If somebody comes up to me and says, can you put this there? That's what I'm hearing. I'm not hearing a series, of.
I've just
Yes.
That's reminded me of something. We've not talked about my experience of you as a potentially autistic person, because the more I think about it, I remember that we lived together as students, and I remember I'd say, oh, it's up there on the right cupboard, and you'd just stand in the kitchen going, and I think, what's wrong with him?
Yes, that's interesting. You've got a very good memory there. But what happened as well, for example, this case in point, yesterday I was in a nice tea room I go to, tea shop, lovely place, doing my Spanish homework and what have you. There was this lady next to me, and she said, out of nowhere, to my surprise, she wanted me to pass me the 2 teaspoons that I had, like, because in a little pot, these teaspoons which come in handy. And I just like, I panicked, like, I was just like, oh, I didn't expect it to speak to me for starters. And then she was
Yeah.
pointing over at something, so my instinct is going to go, what? Like, what's she saying? What's she
Yeah.
wanting? Oh, she just, but you kind of slightly panic when she points over at something and you're like, where? That's what I'm like. When somebody points at something, I'm like, where? I can't see it, like it's such a pressurized situation when somebody get that from up there. Oh, what's that? Like, you're kind of like, where? I instinctively kind of look
Right.
around like, that's what I do. Stuff like
That's
that, little things
yeah.
like that. Yeah.
There's probably so many things that
Yes.
I don't want to put a scenario in your head, but have you ever given any thought? Well, if you're still coming to terms with this and learning about it, you may not
Yeah.
have done. But I'm wondering whether people who are diagnosed as an adult, whether there's not a lament necessarily, but whether there's any sense of, had I received this diagnosis as a child, obviously things were different, 70s,
Yeah.
80s, but
Yes.
had I been growing up now, or had I received that diagnosis, would perhaps things have been easier? Again, we don't know, it's
I
conjecture,
know.
but
Well,
like school, for example, did you have any
yes.
specific struggles in school that you could now retrospectively put down to autism?
Well, I'll answer kind of, there's 2 questions in there. So I'll answer the first one in terms of there's no regret whatsoever on my part because as you hit the nail on the head, it was the 80s,
Yeah.
people weren't people weren't as clued up on this back then, and fair enough, that's life, you can't win them all. So I'm totally kind of sanguine about the whole thing. It's just like I grew up at that particular time. It wasn't spotted. I have no kind of ill feeling about that. I'm just absolutely take it on the chin. Like, I'm
Hmm.
actually. My attitude's almost like looking at the other way around. Thank God I got diagnosed. I could have gone for my whole life and not gotten diagnosed. So
Yeah.
it's you almost got to try and have the glass half full in some respects. But I got to 42, not diagnosed, but I've got the rest of my life diagnosed. Great. So because people could go for the whole lives undiagnosed or but what was the other question? Yeah, in terms of childhood stuff, yes, there was one example from a childhood that springs to mind, and just literally one where I look back and think, in terms of how things were difficult. I was about 12, 13. I was in secondary school, and I think I was probably, in some respects, in the class, just like slightly the odd one out. Just there was one situation when there was a gentleman came from a French meat company of all things, and I was vegetarian. It was almost like put there to kind of aggravate me, like and what happened was there was a class. And this guy gave a talk in French, literally, and I sent around some kind of things like vegetarians rule in the class. And the French teacher wasn't very happy with me. I see him nowadays, this French teacher, and we get on really well. He's a lovely guy. He's nearly 80 now, God bless him. But at the time, he wasn't very happy with me dive bombing his lesson with this vegetarians rule sign. Anyway, at the time, I remember being in the class, and a certain atmosphere was almost like that guy's a bit weird, And I left the class in tears. It was almost something that I picked up on. It was almost like I'm a bit different. Something's a bit different about me. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I just had a
Right.
sensation. I'm a bit different. And what happened was the teacher, God bless her, she went back in the class and she had words with the class, but that's just one example where I thought, like, I'm not quite the same as other people here, but I
Mm,
can't put my finger on it. And that was just one thing, just literally one example when I was about 12 years old, where I was like, I'm a bit different, but I don't know any more than that.
mm. But then you found your crew,
I did two
and
years later. 2 years later,
yeah,
it took me to the age of 14 to make any friends. It took me between 11 and 14. I didn't really have many friends at secondary school. So that took 3 years. And then I was actually quite active before that. I like that guy, I like that guy, I like that guy. And I kind of made
right.
my friends. But it did take me 3 years at secondary school to kind of make friends. But I did kind of resolve that issue by the age of 14, thank God. And school improved from that age, to be fair. Like,
Yeah.
it definitely did.
And are you still friends with those guys now?
For the most part, one guy disappeared off the scene a little bit, but I'm still good friends with guys I went to school with, which is brilliant. And they've been very understanding of my various conditions over the years. They've been fantastic.
So you've got a bunch of neurotypical friends or
Well,
thereabouts,
I guess I'm not
as
sure they
far
would
as they
describe
know.
themselves.
So is there anything else you want to say about your autism diagnosis? Like, is there anything else you're looking to find out about, or, anything, I guess?
I guess I'm at the beginning of the whole journey in a way. Although I'm 46, I got diagnosed at 42. I haven't done much reading on the subject over 3.5, 4 years. and I need to do some more. I don't need to, but I intend to do some more. I've got my mum, God bless her, gave me a book the other day, so there's a lot of learning to be done about it. And what the final thing I'll say, I guess, is, this book I got. One of the things that they said in the book was like, and I probably found this even in recent times, is that one of the qualities of people with this condition is steely determination. And I guess I do find that in myself. I've often said to myself, "You've got like an iron will," like once I put my mind to something, it just I was like that with guitar. I'm not an amazing guitarist, but I'd played it for 20 odd years, and I just kind of persisted. It's not the most comfortable thing to do at times. You bar chords, for example, and they're not very easy, but I persisted at that. And likewise with my Spanish, like I'm one of the better ones in the class, perhaps because even though it's not easy to start off with, you're just gonna go, come on, come on, come on, and so I think I probably do have that steely determination at the things that I care about, but I'm not sure that,
Absolutely.
yeah, at the things I care about, that's what I say, yeah.
Yeah. The things that capture your
Yeah,
attention and your
definitely,
imagination.
yes.
Um, and those can be lifelong interests, right? Like
Yes,
music. So brilliant. It's been a real insight, I think, into just, I mean, again, you're one story, you're
yes,
one person, and we're learning all the time that autism is a million different things, just with some shared struggles and some shared commonalities. But I think you're doing brilliant, and I'm really, really pleased that you've got this diagnosis, which, as you say, is a good thing,
yeah,
next to some of the more perhaps difficult
yeah,
mental health stuff that you've had to deal with. And maybe as you lean more into the autism,
yes,
it'll help on the other side of things. Who knows?
yes, I think so. I think that's a good way of putting it, actually, yes.
Thank you so much, Simon.